I'm Aaron from PhoneDog.com, and this is the Apple iPhone 5. Has Android surpassed it? We're going to find out in the video review. When you look at this device, if you're like me, the first thing you probably think is the Apple iPhone 5 is finally here. We've been waiting for this thing for years. We thought the 4S was going to be called the 5, but it obviously ended up being the 4S. Now the 5 is in the flesh, and we don't have to hear any news articles or anything about the iPhone 5 coming or the rumored iPhone 5. It's actually here. It's available now, 16, 32, 64 gigabyte versions on AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint. It's available in white and in black. The white has kind of an aluminum looking back, and then of course the black one has this kind of gunmetal looking aluminum back. But beautiful design, and when you look at it from an iPhone perspective and an iPhone perspective alone, it's a beautiful upgrade to the iPhone line. It's packing an Apple A6 dual-core processor that's clocked around 1 gigahertz. It's got a 4-inch display now, so 4-inch Retina display with 326 pixels per inch, an 8-megapixel camera that's been improved as well with 1080p HD video recording, Apple's iOS 6 on this device, and like I said, a gigabyte of RAM, which is nice, a 1.2 megapixel front-facing camera that supports HD, so you can use it, or they're calling it a FaceTime HD camera, so you can use it, obviously, for taking front-facing pictures as well as FaceTime calling. It's packing Apple's iOS 6 to the latest iteration of Apple's iPhone OS, though it looks exactly the same in a lot of ways as previous versions, so it's definitely getting long in the tooth. If you've used any version of iPhone, it looks very similar to what we saw in 2007 and 08 and 09, so in terms of a refresh, there's some great improvements to this, but Apple kind of takes the conservative approach, which reminds me a little bit of Research in Motion. Obviously, Apple's business is far more diversified than Research in Motion. That said, it reminds me a lot of taking that kind of conservative, well, it just works, things are selling well, so we're going to keep it kind of approach. And unfortunately, I think, long term, that may not be the best strategy for Apple, but obviously they're selling like hotcakes right now. The report just came in, 5 million of these were sold over the weekend, and like I said, it's in black and in white. I have 2 units in the house right now, or in the office. Verizon and AT&T both support 4G LTE capabilities as well as a Sprint one. So we've got 4G on this device finally, and some neat improvements that I can't wait to talk about with you. But before we get into that, special thanks to Best Buy Mobile for hooking us up with devices like the iPhone 5 for use in our One Paw Bandit giveaway game, which we give to you on instantwin.phonedog.com. When you go into Best Buy Mobile to get the iPhone 5 or whatever, you get the One X, the Galaxy S3, you'll walk out working. They'll help you set up your email, your web, your contacts, all that stuff. So when you walk out the door, you're good to go at Best Buy Mobile. But I want to talk a bit more about smartphones in general, because for today's smartphone users, it's all about telling a story. Whether that story involves Android, iOS, Windows Phone, or a smaller platform is obviously the consumer's choice, but smartphone operating systems have arguably cultivated individual cultures. Much like your preferences in clothing or food, we buy Android, iOS, or Windows Phone based on culture of choice and ecosystem. So if you like iTunes, you like the Apple ecosystem, obviously you're going to probably be integrated better into an iPhone than an Android device. If you're in a Gmail ecosystem, you use Google Voice on a regular basis, Google Docs, or now I guess Google Drive, perhaps an Android device is better for you. Same thing with Windows Phone. If you use SkyDrive, and of course their ecosystem is arguably less developed than the Apple ecosystem and the Google ecosystem, but still there's one there and it's budding and it's becoming a relatively decent ecosystem. But once hammered for lag and fluidity issues, today's high-end Android devices have finally caught up in the fluidity department. So now it's less of a battle of like, well, Android has Gmail integration and all that good stuff, but they're so laggy and terrible. They're not the case anymore. You look at the high-end devices, the One X, the Evo 4G LTE, the Galaxy S3, the lag issues are mostly gone. Obviously, you have a little bit of a stutter depending on the way the operating system is configured. It's obviously different than iOS. That said, it's much better than what it was years ago, and it's finally caught up. So that's no longer an argument for the most part in the smartphone battle. Now it's like, which features? And I think this is an area where Apple has historically dominated in the fluidity department, and they still do, but they lack in a lot of areas, most notably widgets, things like that, things that people are used to now. Widgets, 4G LTE, which obviously the iPhone 5 now has, and more. So that's something we'll talk about in the full review. So Apple's flagship device may be the best single-selling smartphone, but I think they're playing some catch-up in a lot of ways, so we'll talk about that right now. Obviously, iOS 6 pre-installed in this. Let's jump right in and take a look at some things on this device, and we'll start with the phone. So you can obviously see iOS 6 has kind of refreshed the operating system a little bit. You'll notice that the phone looks different, and obviously, like I said, it has a 4-inch Retina display, so the display is a little bit taller, obviously, and compare this to something like the Galaxy S3, which is over here on my desk to give you a size comparison, or perhaps something like the Nokia Lumia 900, over here with a 4.3-inch display and a polycarbonate shell. Just to give you a comparison of the look and feel, it's exactly the same width, but they just made it taller, so it's really odd pulling it out of the box, because you're like, this literally feels like a 4S, but it's like they took like some sort of thing and just pushed the 4S up and made a 5. So again, they just squashed it out, if you will. and made a 5. So it's a little bit different there, but still, and it takes some time to get used to, but the build quality is fantastic on this device. When it comes to look and feel alone, they do a fantastic job, and it continues over onto this one. Now, there are reports, our own Taylor Martin had this issue, and I actually see it on a couple of my units as well. Little nicks and little scratches, both in the aluminum and up here at the top, which is also the aluminum as well. I've seen this, I believe the AT&T one that I have has a nick up at the top. I'll have to double check between part 1 and part 2, but still kind of frustrating. You know, it seems like there's always that one thing or 2 or 3 things that happen with the iPhone. Antenna gate with the iPhone 4. That seems to be the thing here. A lot of people are reporting scuffs and scratches out of the factory on their iPhone 5. So obviously you pay $900 for a phone, you get it in the office or in the house, and all of a sudden it's like scratches. You're like, wait a second, that's not great. And so that's the number one thing I'm hearing right now. But 18% thinner, 20% lighter, if I recall. I may have the statistics flipped around, but it's 18% either lighter or thinner. But you know, noticeably lighter, noticeably thinner than the previous build of the iPhone, the 4S, obviously. So it looks nice. It feels great in the hand. It's oddly light feeling. I think that was the first thing. 2 things I noticed when I pulled it out of the box. It's very light, and it looks funky being incredibly tall. It actually almost feels like a TV remote. So it took me a couple of days to get used to working with the review units. That said, I'm finally used to it, I think, you know, and it brings some nice improvements both in iOS 6 and the overall design. I love the metal on the back. This thing just feels sturdier than the 4 and the 4S, which was all glass on the front, all glass on the back. It feels sturdier. It is lighter. And it feels like it's easier to hold in the hand, obviously, because of the size. It packs a nano SIM card over here. So nano SIMs, not micro SIMs, not regular SIMs. And then up top, you'll notice that the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack has moved to the bottom. But you still have your power button up here. You got your antenna band areas. You've got your switch to switch between sound and silent, or vibrate, depending on your preferences. Volume rocker over here. And then down at the bottom, you have Apple's new Lightning port down here, a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, and speaker holes as well. So it's a beautiful industrial looking design. That said, I find this is kind of 50-50 depending on who you ask. I don't care for the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack to be at the bottom, because if you're like me, you listen to it when you're in the car, you put it down in the cup holder, you put it down in some sort of cup holder while you're working out at the gym, and when you have the headphones down at the bottom, it kind of creates a little bit of an issue with tangling and cords, you know, tangling and doing things like that. So I always preferred for it to be at the top, but that said, it is at the bottom now. And of course, the FaceTime camera has been centered just above the speaker area, or the earpiece area. So you've got that up there. Apple's iOS 6 brings Maps as well, which is a custom Apple product. We'll take a look at that in just a second. But first, I want to come into messages here, and I want to get rid of one of these messages that I was sending on one of my personal lines. And then, of course, you can see the data alert here. And we'll take a look here. We'll open up a new message, and we'll go in. So obviously iOS 6, you're seeing these subtle changes, the blue up here at the top, things that we've probably seen before. And then this as well, Facebook and Twitter integration, which we'll cover in just a second. But of course, you see the typical notifications area along with weather and stocks, but you've got tap to tweet and tap to post as well. Now, 4-inch display, same keyboard here, same width as well, because again, the device hasn't changed when it comes to a width standpoint. But that said, I'm noticing, and it's probably because of the way they did the display. Basically on the 4S, there was a glass panel, and then there was a touchscreen area. Now it's all meshed into one. And so the glass and the touchscreen is all kind of one piece. That said, I'm noticing some issues with touch responsiveness. I noticed particularly with the Q and the P, or conversely with the 1 and the 0, I'm finding a really hard time pressing those buttons, and just certain things. I type incredibly fast on the 4 and the 4S, and I noticed on the 5, I'm about 10 to 15% slower on the 5 than I am on the 4 and the 4S, and it's not getting faster either. So for example, watch me type event, and I'll turn the sound on so you can hear it. And I'm typing the same thing over and over again. That one actually wasn't valid. But you can see that it kind of lags and stutters, or has an issue keeping up with my typing. I've never seen that on the iPhone before. In fact, that's one of the biggest reasons why I like the iPhone, is because historically, I've had no problems typing on it. It's always kept up, but I'm having a really hard time on the 5, so hopefully this will be addressed with a software update event, as you can see. But then we'll just type a normal sentence as well, so you can see the Quick Brown Fox is ready. Actually, Quick Brown Fox is ready for lunch, because Quick Brown Fox just realized he has not had lunch yet. And it is 1:30. Typical Quick Brown Fox. He does that all the time. Portrait to landscape transitions nice and fast. And again, because the screen's kind of elongated, you'll see that the transition effect is ever so slightly different on this device than it has been on previous iPhones. So typing, definitely an issue. Hope it gets fixed with the software update. Really having a hard time. Then also, if you follow me on Twitter at phonedog_Aaron, you'll see that I posted a picture this morning of this weird, like, staticky line that occasionally goes across on my keyboard. And it's kind of like it's like static on a TV kind of thing, or like Final Destination, you know, where you see that like static. Maybe I'm going to die in 7 days. Maybe this is like the present day version of the Ring. I don't know. But I noticed there was some static, and there are reports of that on Twitter and on the internet as well. So that is something to keep in mind. Let's take a look at browsing as well. Not a whole lot's changed in terms of the browser, but you'll notice, for example, I'll click this, and it gives me the option to mail it, message it, Twitter, add to home screen with the Phone Dog logo, Facebook, print, bookmark, add to reading list, and copy. So it looks a little bit different there. Otherwise, pinch to zoom, still incredibly responsive here. Very fast thanks to LTE. I'm getting some great speeds, which we'll talk about in part 2. I've been really impressed with this as well. Pinch to zoom, responsive. Portrait to landscape transitions, nice and responsive. Little to no lag, and obviously, like I said, we're back up on LTE now, though that said, both the Verizon and Sprint versions can't use LTE when you're on the phone because it's all integrated into one radio, and so there's no separate LTE radio and separate CDMA radio. So even though CDMA is obviously what they're using as the backhaul for phone calls, and LTE is what they're using for data, because they're integrated onto one chip, whenever you make phone calls, LTE goes away. So you're dealing with that same issue you've dealt with for years if you're on Verizon or Sprint on a non-4G device. You know, it's kind of frustrating. And then you look at other devices in the store that can do that, like the Galaxy S3 on Verizon or the Droid Incredible 4G LTE, and you see, hey, those are also LTE devices, also priced kind of similarly or a little bit cheaper in some cases, and they can do that. So that's going to be a decision if that's important to you. You know, you use maps while you're on the phone, or you're on the phone, you need to look up something, and you're not near a Wi-Fi hotspot. That could be a point of contention and make you want to choose something like the Galaxy S3 or the Droid Incredible 4G LTE or some other Android 4G LTE device on Verizon. Quickly, I want to show you this. Tap to tweet and tap to post means I can easily tap to tweet here. From the settings, I added my Twitter information. And I'm going to say hello from iPhone review video. Hello from iPhone review video. And it looks like I can't do it in landscape mode, but you'll see it pops up there. Tweet, I'll send that. And then, of course, down here I can do the same thing to Facebook. Post it to Facebook, it brings it down. I can add location, add friends, tag, and more. So those are all integrated, and you just saw that how I had to click that a couple of times to cancel out. So the responsiveness just isn't quite there on the iPhone 5. I don't know if it's a software issue. Hopefully we'll see that fixed in later versions.